Thank you so much. My name is Hector Muñoz, and I am a doctoral research fellow at the Leibniz Center for Agricultural Landscape Research in the Alliance Biodiversity International CIAT, and a PhD student at the Humboldt University in Berlin. So my research focuses on assessing the impacts on mechanisms of environmental peacebuilding interventions, and also in programming climate security and environmental peacebuilding projects. Right. So my presentation is going to talk about how different tools of conflict sensitivity in a throughout research approach can help to tailor theories of change. So one of the main challenges in monitoring and evaluation in environmental peacebuilding interventions is the problem of attribution. So basically, to allow to explain causality between a specific activity and an impact on areas such as peacebuilding, which are complex processes. So one of these challenges is, for example, to address or to assess a specific contribution at the short term and how these translate into systemic long-term impacts in peacebuilding processes. So why is it important to have a clear theory of change for monitoring and evaluation in environmental peacebuilding? Theories of change explains the pathway through which a project can achieve specific results, and it is a tool for an effective impact to measure and also to manage the challenges that can happen in the implementation of an environmental peacebuilding project. And I'm going to center also the presentation how the do no harm approach can help to set realistic theories of change in an inclusive and participative manner. Right, so one of the challenges, again, of monitoring and evaluation in environmental peacebuilding is that the peacebuilding component is rather complex and very comprehensive. The only definition of peace could be difficult. So when you talk about peacebuilding, there are many different dimensions coming from development, education, dialogue and conflict resolution, to governmental and multilateral efforts, governance challenges, transitional justice, etc. So it is very important at the very beginning of the project, at the designing phase, to identify and define to which peacebuilding dimension the project wants to contribute. And also to know what type of conflict or climate security risks exist in the context that you want to do the intervention, and what are the drivers of the conflict. Further, it is important to know how is the intervention contributing to address the conflict drivers or transform the conflict, whether there is a structural conflict or a contextual socio-environmental conflict. And it's also important to have an approach that the beneficiaries on site know better than an external evaluator. Right, so the do no harm approach is a conflict sensitivity tool developed by the collaborative learning projects of CBA, which allows or is a way to tailor theories of change for environmental peacebuilding. So what this tool does is to conduct a conflict assessment and through 7 steps. So the first one is to analyze the context. So have an understanding of the conflict drivers and on the different dimensions that a context can have, such as political economy, needs, an assessment of needs, etc. And then the crucial parts that can be used from the do no harm to tailor theories of change is to analyze the dividers, which are sources of tension or divisions in a society, and how an activity can affect these dividers. So how can an activity of a project can have unintended consequences that can even create new conflicts. And also the do no harm approach analyzes the connectors. The connectors are factors that bring people and groups together, and they are also known as local capacities for peace. So once you go through the program details and the different patterns of implementing the activities, and you analyze how each activity have an impact on the dividers and on the connectors, that you can see precisely which activities are diminishing the dividers and are enhancing the connectors, which activities have the potential to put people together, to open dialogue spaces, and where do you need to tailor the theory to diminish the dividers and build opportunities for and create opportunities to build peace more actively. So the do no harm approach enhanced could be not only preventing new conflicts to emerge, but also addressing the present conflicts through specific peace building activities. Sure. So we apply the do no harm approach to tailor and to consult on developing a better theory of change to take account of the impacts of two projects that were implemented in Colombia in peace building. So the two case studies that we conducted were in Caquetá, Colombia, which is a region in the south of Colombia and is the entry point of the Amazon to the Amazon region in Colombia. So it is an area that is very rich in water and biodiversity. It has many natural parks and protected areas, but it has also suffered by the armed conflict because it was one of the main FARC guerrilla territories. And it has been affected also by decades of unsustainable land uses. So coming from mining to illegal coca crops, it has been an area that has taken a large influx of populations that were displaced by violent conflict. So imagine that you are on your land, and due to the violence, you are forced to migrate, and they start entering into the Amazon forest, clean the land, and then the government in the 70s was promising to give titles to this land. However, not all the farmers that are located in this area have land tenure agreements. And after the peace agreement was signed with the FARC guerrilla and the state, there was a power vacuum, and the deforestation rates again increased. So you can see here on the map how the deforestation hotspots are entering into protected areas, such as this one, which is called the Serranía de Chiribiquete, which is a natural park that is the size of Belgium and is being threatened now by an expansive agricultural frontier. And yeah, this was basically the context of the case. So there has been many projects coming from international cooperation to stop deforestation and also to help the peace building process in the region. The first case is called Sustainable Land Use Systems, which is a climate mitigation strategy. So a land-based emissions reduction strategy, which consists on developing productive strategies that meet the livelihood aspirations of the farmers in ways that are sustainable and maintain environmental integrity. So these basically are arrangements at the farm level, for example, agroforestry systems that are implemented with farmers that already have land titles and which sign conservation agreements that prevent them to cut more forests, and also to connect, they try to connect these farmers with zero deforestation value chains, such as the production of cocoa cocoa as a way to substitute illegal crops. Right, so for the Sustainable Land Use System project, we implemented the do no harm approach by analyzing how each activity would have an impact on the dividers and the connectors, and also to analyzing how by diminishing the dividers and enhancing the connectors, there were some opportunities for peace emerging. So for example, one of the dividers that they found was that land access is not addressed in the project. And one of the connectors that they found is that when participatory methodologies and the co-design of the conservation agreements were put in place, there was an increase in the trust in the project, and the people was more committed to exchange knowledge and also experiences with other peasants. And a way to diminish the dividend of land access, it was to have a joint contribution or a collaboration with other projects and working with farmers coming from the program of voluntary illicit crop substitution that already have access to land, and they could profit from these kind of agroforestry practices to enhance their production and prevent them to get into the forest to cut more trees. So after we conducted this, then we try to develop some peace building indicators. So for example, for these forest conservation agreements activity, there was the peace building factor that was prioritized was building a peace culture and also management or peaceful management of natural resources. So the assumption behind it was that an agreement signed to create forest conservation that recognizes the cultural practices of the farmers would enhance trust and would also provide like social cohesion between the farmers. So one indicator that was merely quantitative was the number of conservation agreements that was signed, and an ex post indicator that we implemented was the perceiving increased levels of trust after the conservation agreements were signed. And another quantitative example from the environmental side was the number of hectares that were protected. And to address the peace building factor of political and social participation, it was important to take account of the percentage of the participation of vulnerable populations in the farms. So for example, victims of the conflict, if those were beneficiaries prioritized, and also other minorities such as indigenous, or also women that were household, the head of the households, etc. A second case is called protected areas in peace, and this was a case, or this is a case that a program which aims to support the governance of protected areas in the region. And I'm going to talk about specifically an area which is a buffer zone of a protected area in a natural park called Cordillera de los Picachos, which also has a special jurisdiction of farmers that is called in Spanish Zona de Reserva Campesina, which allows certain governance structure where the farmers have an improved decision-making scenario. And there was conducted a biological expedition where farmers, former guerrillas, park rangers, and scientists entered into an area that was previously inaccessible due to security conditions, and they conducted this inventory of biological species. to start developing an ecotourism project. Right. In the second case, one of the working packages was to create information and monitoring systems to prevent biodiversity loss. And one of the dividers that they found, or sources of tension, was that there was a lack or unequal access and transparency to public information systems. Also, women were excluded from these kind of systems, and these systems were not used by decision makers. So the connectors that they saw was that the information was used as a base for decision making, or could be used as a base for decision making, and that participatory community monitoring creates a space where interests, needs, and problematics are solved through dialogue. So, for example, there was this premise that the people wanted to defend and protect their territory, and having these tools to monitor scientifically or more technically the impacts of different interventions on the environment will help them to create this community of practice, and they were starting to create a shared identity and to develop more information also with regards to the species that were existing in these buffer zones of the protected areas. And the opportunities for peace to increase these connectors is to democratize this information access, and also having access to this kind of information help them to reduce the power asymmetries in the decision-making scenarios, and also to create capacity building to manage the information and to have a more precise participation in the decision-making scenarios. So, which mechanisms and indicators emerged from the second project? So, to develop a monitoring and evaluation framework, we conducted we had a methodological approach that was based in 4 phases. So first, a literature review, revising theories of change and indicators of environmental peacebuilding interventions. Then we conducted a context analysis and conflict sensitivity exercise through a work cafe to understand the community's perception of conflict and deforestation drivers. Then we made semi-structured interviews focusing on individual stakeholders' perceptions of cocoa value chains in this region. Then a do no harm workshop to understand the perceptions around the conflict and peace drivers. And then we analyze all of this data to develop a theory of change and indicators, also based on a prioritization of the indicators and the peace building dimensions that the stakeholders provided. And at the end, we did a little pilot testing of indicators with a survey of 929 households. Basically, these were farmers that already implemented some form of agroforestry practices, and we asked them about peace building factors such as trust, opening dialogue spaces, and the probability that they could cooperate with other actors. Both case studies were somehow complementary. However, the approaches were different, and they were on different stages. So the first one, the Sustainable Land Use Systems one, was a project that had also the aim to develop some research, and it was a combination of research and implementations. And it was a very technical approach to develop land-based emissions mitigation, and also to implement very technical agricultural practices. So they didn't have that much expertise on peace building activities. So for them, it was particularly interesting to try to put together both worlds and to address the specific drivers of conflict that they were encountering. For example, in one of the regions that they were implementing, there was a lack of access to water, which also implies some conflicts. And through the technical solutions, they were able to develop a different approach that was less water intensive to diminish the conflict. However, they also realized that they needed to engage with the regional governments to address the water issue, and this was one of the main lessons learned about it. So for this, the measuring the peacebuilding dimension was a little bit more difficult because there were not explicit peacebuilding activities. For the second case, that was supporting protected areas, it was on a different stage, and they wanted to tailor more the theories of change to account how they were contributing to solving land use conflict peacefully at this specific area in the buffer zones of the protected areas. But also they wanted to see if they were contributing to the bigger civilian conflict or the bigger violence in Colombia. So for this, it was also important to do an analysis of the structural causes of the Colombian conflict. And through the do no harm approach and the conflict assessment, they realized that they needed to engage with other actors. So it's also important to have flexibility on the approaches and also on the monitoring frameworks, and also to have like the possibility to redesign the project on the go. One of the important lessons that we learned is that it was important to differentiate between the structural causes of the armed Colombian conflict, which, for example, were weak state presence or limited limits of political participation, with the contextual conflicts or challenges that were present there. So in this case, this specific activity of developing information systems were indeed contributing to the weak state presence, because it helped them to have more evidence-based decision-making processes. But also this specific activity helped with the inclusion in political scenarios of these affected communities. So we also developed some indicators of perception. So intra-community perceived trust, if this has increased, and we conducted a focus group for this. And also how the trust between, for example, the communities and the park rangers increased. And for this, we also took it further and to see not only if trust was the first step to get engaged, and then cooperation was developed between state and communities. And for this, we developed an indicator to see the number of cooperation processes where communities and the state are cooperating at the moment. So one example of a theory of change for this component of information system is that there is a contextual conflict, which was the lack of information and capacities for territorial governance, which also facilitates the deforestation. And the action was to improve information systems through capacity building and conducting participatory monitoring. The mechanism behind to have this an impact on peacebuilding was that participatory monitoring creates this community of practice, and also the contact hypothesis, bringing conflicting parties together, such as park rangers and farmers or farmer guerrillas, and having a common goal, which was monitoring the biodiversity laws, help them to create social cohesion. And the outcome is, or the expected outcome is, to conserve forests, to enhance the quality of natural resources, and also to create conditions to improve local communities' well-being and trust. Right. So to put into implementation a monitoring and evaluation framework or system to assess environmental peacebuilding intervention. First, it's very important to separate the structural causes of the armed conflict from contextual or emerging socio-environmental conflicts, to understand the project's specific contribution and the extent that this contribution could be translated to positive peace building. Also, it is important to define and prioritize with the stakeholders to which peace building dimensions the project aims to contribute, whether that is socioeconomic inclusion, or developing peace dialogue scenarios, or transitional justice, the reincorporation of former combatants, etc. Also, it is important to consult the people about what kind of indicators make sense in a specific context. This could be very obvious, but sometimes the project has had a process of design where the people are the last ones to be consulted, and this can also have unintended consequences. With regards to the do no harm approach, this approach of conflict sensitivity contributes to understanding how the project activities contribute to specific drivers of conflict or peace-building dimensions. For example, if it's a very technical project that doesn't have the specific mechanisms to contribute to peace-building dimensions, the do no harm approach that looks into the possible dividers already recognize these conflicts and also recognize the ways to solve the conflicts or to enhance the possible connections that exist between actors on the field. Also, this approach can help in the refinement of the strategies to build peace. And also, the do no harm approach should be integrated in the monitoring and evaluation framework, not just as a checkbox to say that the project is conflict sensitive, but to reflect and recognize together with the stakeholders during the whole process of implementation, to also learn from the failures and adapt to the changing conditions, especially in conflict affected situations. There are significant time and budget constraints to undertake complex evaluations, and also in the context of my process, it was an academic experience that wanted to match research, an analytical and academic research approach to a specific climate implementation or international development process. So there are a mismatch between the times for research and the times for implementing activities or practices on the field. So of course, ideally you will have all of the resources and all of the time to conduct a proper baseline for the project before implementing, and then develop the whole monitoring system. However, this is very difficult to do, and the most important lesson is to try to be very flexible in conducting the evaluations, and try to be practical in the integrating the reflections and the lessons learned on the ongoing process, on the practice. But it is, however, very important for the international development projects or the international cooperation aid projects to have this time to reflect, to stop for a little while, and then be flexible enough to rearrange their processes. When I started the process, I wanted to develop indicators for environmental peace building, to assess environmental peace building interventions. However, I realized that the indicators were only showing the change of a situation from an initial point to another, but the mechanisms were very difficult to understand. And also that it was more important than the indicators were the peace building categories, or the categories that I wanted to explain through these mechanisms. So that's what I focus more on the theories of change. And for this, I think it's very important to have tailored and very realistic theories of change, and also trying to connect the different theories of change in a broader set of complex challenges, and how a specific contribution could also be connected to longer term impacts, and also a more complex process to change societies or systems as a whole. Another observation that I have is that it is very important to have a mixed methods approach, especially in environmental peace building, because, for example, you can have more direct quantitative measurements for environmental outcomes. For example, number of hectares that are conserved, or number of hectares of deforestation that were reduced, etc. But to assess peace building outcomes, you can also implement quantitative methods, but to understand the quantitative methods on a specific context, it is very important to understand how people explain their changes and the perceptions of how these projects created different outcomes. For example, in the cases that I studied, when I conducted the focus group, I asked to measure the increase in the level of trust with a number. So, for example, from 1 to 5, where 1 is a minimal increase in trust and 5 was a great increase in trust, how much trust did you got with the authorities? And they give a measurement, but the most rich answer was the explanation of the number. So, for example, in the case of the protected areas, they said that the biological expedition indeed increased the trust with the local park rangers, because they started having dialogue again. However, they didn't give the number the higher qualification, because they perceived that the national government had policy incoherence, and that they were giving another approach to protected areas that were more based on hard security interventions, and that the dialogue scenarios that were emerging at the local level were not taken into account, and there was this disruption of the national policies. So all of these complexities can only be explained through qualitative aspects or qualitative approaches.